but my final destination was in Ponera. I had a meeting on Wednesday from 8:30. So I told myself that I'm going to spend a night in Lilongwe on Tuesday, and then on Wednesday morning, I'm going to proceed to Mponera. So I left Blantyre around 11 a.m. My plan was that when I get to Ncheu, I'm going to stop for a while to rest, but also to rest the car I was driving. So I drove past Chingeni, past Nsipe, past Kampepuza, and as you approach Ncheu, I think there is a place called the Tandizi. While driving, I was woken up by a collision. I can't tell how it happened, but somehow it looked like while I was still driving, I had drifted into sleep. So what woke me up was the moment of collision. I knew I had collided with something, but I didn't see what I had collided with. So upon waking up, I tried to control my car. And then the car swerved and then went through the ditch on the sides of the road, and it stopped. I was fully conscious by that time. I managed to gather my valuables because I know what happens when an accident happens like that. So I collected my phones, I collected my wallet. I tried to open the door, I found that it opened and then got out. So by then, people had started gathering around. Some came and asked me, "Are you injured?" I said, "Yeah, I feel like." By then, I was bleeding in the mouth. I think because of the impact, I had beaten myself on the tongue. And then some little pain on my shoulder. A police officer came. It was at that point that I now began to realize what had happened. So I had collided with a guy. When you hear of his story, he says that he had seen my car approaching. He tried to warn me with his lights. He even tried to hoot, but to his surprise, he saw that I didn't stop. I had actually encroached into his lane when I hit him on the sides. The long and short of this story is that we both survived this accident and were treated as outpatients at Ncheu District Hospital. But what I want to tell you is not to be the impact of the accident, but what I know is that this collision with this guy is what actually saved me. Because if I had not collided with him, I was going to drive into the bush and probably overturn and die in the process. So for me, what I thought I had hit, upon reflection, I saw that it was God's mercy that I had collided with. And that is what preserved my life. And the question that I asked myself at that moment was that now that God has saved me, now that I have collided with his mercy, what do I do with my life? And I think at that point, that's when the issue of stewardship begins to arise. If we read Testimonies for the Church, volume number 4, page 519, Sister White says, "We are indebted to God for all that we have. Our time, our talents, our influence, our means, all belong to him and should be used to promote his glory. For me, the fact that God saved me on this particular day reminded me about the vanity of life. Some people say that life is a fleeting shadow, but God has preserved me to remind me that for everything that I have, including the time that I have, the talents that I have, the influence that I have, the things that I have, I am indebted to God because he is the one who has provided that to me. And Sister White is actually saying that everything that we have belongs to him. So what I want to say this morning is that stewardship begins with mercy. That's why in the verse that we read in Romans chapter 12, verse 1, Paul is not saying, in view of your blessings. That's not what Paul is saying. Paul is not saying, in view of your income, because some of us think that we first must get rich, we first must have a lot of property for us to begin being good stewards. But Paul is not saying that. Instead, Paul says, in view of God's mercy. So it is God's mercy when we come to understand it, when we come to understand how God has been with us through and through. When we look back at the situations that we've passed through in the past, and we understand that it is because of God's mercy that we are where we are, that should be what should propel us to be good stewards. Myself, I realize that on that particular day, I should have died, as I have explained. But God's mercy saved me. And now the question is, what am I going to do with this second chance? When you go into the Bible, there are several examples of people that also collided with the mercy of God, and they gave the right response because they understood what God had done for them. The first person that comes to my mind is the Apostle Paul himself. We are very familiar with his story from Acts chapter 9, but also from 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 9 and 10. We can infer from Paul's experience that he actually collided with divine light and mercy. He was on his way to Damascus. He was going there to persecute Christians. He deserved judgment, but Jesus transformed him along the way. Verse 4 actually of Acts chapter 9, that's where Christ is asking, so why do you persecute me? So what we see is here is a person who was heading toward violence, but collision with Christ, collision with mercy, led to salvation, and it transformed his mission from a mission of destruction to a mission of salvation. He collided with mercy instead of colliding with judgment. And later on, in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 10, Paul actually acknowledges that it is by the grace of God. He actually says, by the grace of God, I am what I am. So Paul understands that it is the grace of God that transformed him. And we know from our understanding of the Bible that when Paul was transformed, after colliding with the mercy of Christ, Paul became a very strong steward of the gospel of God, even surpassing those people who had actually been with Christ themselves. The second character that comes to my mind is the prodigal son. we read the story of the prodigal son from Luke chapter 15, verses 11 to 32. And if we are familiar with the story, we will see that the son, after squandering the portion that he has received from his father, when he was returning, after realizing that he had been in the wrong, what he expected is not what he got. He actually expected punishment upon his return. But when we read that story, we find that he collided with the mercy of his father. And verse 20 of Luke chapter 15 actually tells us that while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. So at that moment, when the son thought he had hit rock bottom, at the moment when he thought he didn't deserve to be called his father's son, that's the moment when God extended his